Josh Hammer's joining us, editor-at-large at NewsWeek. He's also got this great Josh Hammer show, and he's over at The First on TV as well. Hello, Josh. Welcome, sir.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. You almost heard the end of my career with Carville F-bombing, but the guys in the booth caught it. It happens. It happens, but thank God for the safety of the brilliant people at the board. Josh, yesterday was kind of a tough day for a lot of people, but how are Republicans, how are conservatives supposed to behave after this?
Well, look, I mean, they say that the first sign of having a plan is to not be in denial. And the very first thing, I think, is for conservatives, for the American right, for patriots, constitutionalists, for all the various people that Hillary Clinton infamously grouped together as the so-called deplorables back in 2016. The first thing to do is to just stare down the barrel as to where we are. You know, this is not your grandfather's America. This is not the America of, picking apple pie and going down to the local 4th of July picnic and, kumbaya, say the Pledge of Allegiance, and, we'll have our bickering over what the appropriate marginal tax rate should be. No. At this point, we are in an environment where the prosecutorial apparatus of one major party, what I like to refer to as the Democrat lawfare complex, they are prosecuting and trying to incarcerate their political opposition. And, Mike, I've heard a lot of chatter over the past 24 to 36 hours. Oh, it's just Donald Trump. It's just the guy who had these vague mafia connections through Roy Cohn, his fixer, January 6th, blah, blah, blah. No, it's actually not just Donald Trump at all. In fact, this goes back at least as far as the Obama administration when they prosecuted the nuns. Yeah, they sued nuns of the Little Sisters of the Poor because they didn't want to subsidize abortifacients foisted upon them by Obamacare. Biden obviously has taken it to a whole nother level. Good friend John Eastman has been through the ringer. He's being disbarred in California, prosecuted in Georgia and Arizona. He lost everything, including multiple debankings from Bank of America and USAA. And obviously Trump and the four criminal prosecutions, in addition to the Tish James civil suit against the Trump organization, that's getting a lot of the attention now. So the very first thing to do is to recognize where you are. Now, if we aspire towards recovering a status quo ante of neutrality, which is what we probably all should want, that's Lady Justice, blindfolded, equal, we're all equal under law. This is what John Adams famously wrote about back in colonial Massachusetts, the Founding Fathers. If you want to get back to that, my proposition, and I recognize it's a somewhat controversial one, although I don't think it should be, is that if you want a truce with these people, with these savages, these miscreants who are trying to throw us into jail, if you want a truce, you're going to have to get to a mutually assured destruction place. You're going to have to take some politicized prosecutions yourself. You're going to have to bloody some noses, proverbially speaking, in order to make sure that they know that they can't overreach like this again. And that's going to be a slow and painful process, Mike. But these conversations have to start, and they have to start, frankly, yesterday.
So you're in favor of let's get in the same arena with them and get as dirty as they did and take out some of theirs, the same way they were trying to take out Donald Trump.
The short answer is yes, and it brings me no joy or pride or anything to say that, right? I mean, I'm a lawyer by background. I went to a great law school. I clerked for a federal appeals judge. I've published constitutional scholarship. I speak at law schools. I've given a lot to our system and advocating for constitutional principles and the broader Anglo-American legal tradition going back to the development of common law in England. I mean, these are things that I care a lot about. But I have to be sober as a commentator, as a host, as a pundit, as a columnist. I have to be sober about where we are. And I just don't see another way forward other than to try to take some scalps as a retributive measure, but also as a prophylactic measure to try to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And, there's lots of other ways that this might go down, right? So one example that I've been giving is, let's say that you're a 30 to 35-year-old young DA, a young district attorney in a very red jurisdiction, the Texas Panhandle, someplace like that. If you're ambitious and you want to make inroads with your party and try to start climbing the political ladder, what is stopping you from filing a creative indictment against someone like an Anthony Fauci or a Deborah Birx? Hunter Biden's federal gun trial is set to start this Monday. His federal tax trial is allegedly starting in September from special counsel David Weiss. But what about all the foreign stuff? What about the FARA corruption, Ukraine, China? So there's a lot of meat left on that bone, too. So these are just some ideas. But again, I'm not happy about what I'm saying. It saddens me that I'm on your show, I'm on the show talking like this. I never would have imagined that I would be saying these things back when I was in law school 8 to 10 years ago or so. But again, I just have to try to be sober and empirical about where we are in America right now.
Well, I think it's fair to put a little bit of the fear of God in the other side, that we're done with just sitting back and letting you punch us. We're done with you just walking over us. I think that's fair. I also think it's important to remind them of how their actions cost them when they did stuff like this in the past. For example, when Harry Reid got rid of the limits on filibustering for judicial appointments, many warned him, many in his own party warned him, hey, don't do this. It's going to screw up Supreme Court nominations. And sure enough, it did. But they don't remember that stuff. So I don't think there's a whole lot of brain muscle memory among the leadership of the Democrats. They just think that they can keep doing this. So I agree with you on this. I'm all for getting to the almost Elliot Ness point that they take out one of ours, we're going to take out 10 of theirs, and we should start again. But what are the chances that leadership in the GOP will actually find a candidate to do that? Or are we just going to have to wait for that to develop organically?
The odds are extraordinarily low. I mean, the one person who might actually take a public stance along these lines is other than Donald Trump himself, right? I mean, he's the kind of person who could actually get some momentum moving. But realistically speaking, this is going to have to come from the grassroots level. It's going to have to be local DAs in towns and counties, maybe some state attorneys general who are well positioned. And it doesn't have to just be people like Hunter Biden here. So, one example that came to mind for me, this is kind of a Venn diagram overlap of two things that can and should be done. The immigration issue, for what it's worth, in my mind, continues to be the number one substantive issue that Republicans ought to run on in this presidential election year. So how about you try to kill two birds with one stone? And if you're an ambitious prosecutor in a state like a Texas or Florida, or which is where I live, some state like that, how about you try to file some high-profile prosecutorial lawsuit, some criminal prosecution against a high-profile open borders activist who is actively wreaking havoc when it comes to the cartels and the human trafficking rings and the fentanyl that's flowing into our country, things like that. It would have to be high-profile in order to have some sort of deterrent effect, but that's just one sort of way to try to kill two birds with one stone, I think.
Well, I think it's interesting that you suggest the border issue and the immigration issue. But it feels like that issue has slid off the front page a little bit. We've been fascinated about this trial, and we've been all wrapped up in the economy. Is the border still a hot enough issue for conservatives and for undecided voters?
Yeah, I think it is. I do think that it is. I mean, the economy continues to sputter along, and inflation is very much a key issue as well. And that's also a huge winning issue for Republicans. And I think Republicans would be remiss to also not focus on inflation. But, I was in, I won't say the exact state, but I was in a Midwestern state about 2 months ago or so in late March. And I was meeting with a high-ranking state official. And this state is obviously not a border state by definition of being in the Rust Belt area. And I was talking to this official, and I kind of prefaced, and I said, so-and-so, like your state's obviously not a border state, but what are you doing about this? And he kind of laughed and said, Josh, every single state is a border state right now. What are you talking about? Because every community is feeling the effects of this. I mean, what the Biden so-called parole program has done in terms of shipping and flying and busing migrants from the border to communities all across the country. I mean, my family in New York City, they talk to me about this issue all the time because of what they're seeing there on the streets of New York City. While Alvin Bragg, by the way, is too busy trying to throw Donald Trump in jail. He's letting illegal aliens run over all of these civic institutions in New York City, and his priorities aren't exactly in order. But I do think that immigration is a major issue for this fall. And I think that Republicans can also make it a campaign pitch that they are going to be the ones to end this lawfare. Now, admittedly, the way to end this lawfare might be to make it a little worse in the short term, again, to bloody some noses. But I think that they can credibly campaign on trying to do their best efforts to restore us to a system of lady justice and blind rule of law, even if it takes in the short to midterm some less than fully kosher tactics, shall we say.
Well, I'm down with that. I think we got to get in the fight before we can expect to win the fight. And you bring up an excellent point. We're talking with Josh Hammer. He's got so much going on. Senior editor-at-large at NewsWeek. He's got the Josh Hammer Show and America on Trial with Josh Hammer, first on TV. And you're everywhere. Do you have a clone, Josh Hammer?
So, it's funny that you asked that. So I actually do have a colleague at the First whose name is actually Josh Hammer. And to make it even funnier enough, there's actually another former journalist at NewsWeek, which is also where I work, who is named Joshua Hammer. And I actually get confused with the latter guy a lot because, we're both at NewsWeek. I was actually taking an Uber to a TV studio a few years ago, and the Uber driver was like, "Man, I was so excited to pick you up because I was reading in your memoir about how you were held captive in Gaza by Hamas." And I was like, that's definitely not me.
Well, there's only one other Mike Opelka, and he's somewhere in Kansas, and he gets my hate mail, and I've apologized to him several times. But you should have a Josh Hammer and a Joshua Hammer happy hour and get all of you together one day and tell stories and exchange identities. I think there's a book there or a movie there that you could do. I guess not.
Look,
I was reaching.
I would welcome the opportunity to meet the other Joshua Hammer if he wants to do that sort of happy hour. I would be happy to do that.
Excellent. Well, I like your approach to coming in swinging, as it were, in the aftermath of the lawfare that was waged against Donald Trump and ultimately waged against the country. Because as Trump successfully has managed to get this sentence out there, and people, I think, are finally understanding it, they're not just coming for me. They could do this to each and every one of us. So until we fight back and let them experience the pain that Donald Trump went through, they're not going to stop. It's a little bit like the terrorists. Until you wipe them all out, they're just going to keep popping up. Josh Hammer, I encourage people to follow you on Twitter X. It's great stuff, and we appreciate you being here as well, sir.